Hi guys, our next assignment here is going to be changing shapes into forms. So shapes are flat and just typically have an outline to them. Forms have a sense of shading, a sense of roundness, a sense of depth, and a sense of a three-dimensional quality. Several things are happening in these little images that help us create form, and one of them is the element of contrast, where you can really see the difference between darks, mediums, and lights. There's this sense of overlap where this horizon line or the edge of this table goes back and reappears over here on this side on all of these images. There's also lots of value gradation, and that value gradation really helps make these shapes, along with the line that's implying a roundness, the value gradation where it goes dark to light really helps create that sense of light and that sense of roundness. There's something called an implied line there. Here's this you can tell where the edge of this cylinder is, even though there isn't a line there, just by the shading that's kind of above and below it. And something in a similar way is something called a lost line, where there's really nothing there. We intentionally left the background out to show you how powerful a nice contrasting background is, but your brain knows where the edge of that circle is, or that sphere. Similarly, because of the bright background, your brain lets you know where the edge of that cube is. We have cast shadows that we kind of dealt with in the snowboard drawing, but this time we're making these objects appear as though they're grounded. So they need to appear, you can even see the shadow of my pencil, how it's separate from the pencil. And now when I touch the ground, it makes contact, so that helps it make it look grounded. There's a single light source, and each one of these pictures has a slightly different light source, so the shadows are going in slightly different directions. There, in that shadow, in that cast shadow, there is a sense of a diffused shadow. So it gets a little bit darker right up next to the shape, and gets a little bit lighter, and sometimes the copy machine that reproduces these really makes it get lighter than it needs to be, but that's what we can deal with that easily. There's something called reflected light as well, where light really does bounce around our world, and when it bounces off this floor and hits the underside of this ball a little bit, it results in a slightly lighter haze, or almost a glow on the bottom side. You can see it happening on this side of the cone, down here on the bottom of the cylinder, and also down here on the bottom of this cube. So all those things are happening to help make these things look like forms. One way we're going to make these things look more natural is by not allowing ourselves to draw any dark outlines. There are no outlines in nature. So when we look around at people and things, there's no outline around it. So we're going to try to make sure to do that with this assignment as well. In class or at home, if you take this home, we're going to ask you to trace it. Just trace very lightly. As you can see here, the lines are pretty light. Trace just the basic shape and where the little horizon line is, and where the cast shadow is, and also the perimeter of that area. We don't want you shading off more than you need to. We're also going to ask you to use some different media. We're going to use some colored pencil, some regular pencil, and some crayon. Believe it or not, crayon can be used very nicely. So here we go. We're going to always use our shading rules. We're going to have to look at our resource image. It's right off screen here. So I have my resource here, and I'm referring back to that very often. And we'll do a little bit of drawing here, then we'll go into fast draw mode and maybe talk a little bit more. But first, there's this nice sense of contrast happening, and it stays pretty dark on this whole background. I won't do the whole thing right now, but I'll show you a couple little things to think about. And I like to do a dark section first, just so I can then relate all the different values and the lights and medium tones to that darkness. So I see on my cone that I'm referring to, there is some shading over on this side. It's a little bit lighter over there. So I'm going to start to lightly build that up. I notice that the area that I'm shading has a similar feature to the shape that it's resting on. This shape goes from narrow to wide, and so does the shading. On the cylinder, this is kind of has two parallel lines on the edge, so where it's shaded also has that kind of thing. And the rounded shape here, and obviously the kind of the squared off shape, the hard edges here. So it's something to watch out for. So here we go, we're going to do a little more shading going down, kind of down the center, and right down the center is where that shading really fades away. So I can almost get myself set up right there and start to let that really fade away. And if you notice, the shading, the area that's shaded, ends right almost exactly where the shadows end. So they kind of meet each other. It's not quite the same here because we have such a small connection point at the base. On the cylinder, it's a similar idea. The shading ends about here, and that's right where the shadow starts too. So that's something to watch out for. As we shade down, I'm noticing that the value of this color, and working in pencil or colored pencil, doesn't matter. You're still pressing harder and softer. You can see that the shade or the value of this green is getting a little darker on the way down. Okay, I'll do a little bit more of that in a minute. So I can get a sense of this reflected light on the side here. I'm going to get that nice crisp edge to the edge of the cone up on top here. Now I'm starting to see where that reflected light is. Maybe we had that idea of reflected light right here to help, and that reflected light's really nice because it'll help you not let the shading blend into the background. It's just that little glow right there. So I'm going to do a little shading in hyper mode. You can watch, and we'll come back and talk to you in a minute. Okay, now that I'm done with this, the cone and the background and the shadow, remember, try to let this shading right there really fade away nicely so it looks like it's rounding off where the light kind of disappears around that cone. Now we have to deal with this wood grain floor that has kind of straight lines, kind of hatching feel to it, with some extra shading there to create some contrast. And notice there are no outlines, so we're going to stick with that. And one thing when we start to make this, there are a couple little things to think about. One thing you can do is take a piece of scratch paper, line it up right on the edge of a straight line, and I'm going to make a little mark so I don't go too far with this, but you can just start to make some of your lines. Just go straight out from there. I don't want to go past this because that's where the end of the cone is. And it's very, when you make these lines, you want to almost feel like you're making that idea of a check mark. So when you make these lines, and now you make a check mark and it kind of fades away right out here. When you make these lines, and I like to make these lines go in both directions where there's room. And you kind of vary how far apart they are and vary the length. You don't want to have your wood grain floor lines all kind of line up together. So they also kind of float around. I can show you what that kind of looks like. Another thing to think about is start right on your very light pre-sketch pencil line. And now I'm coming back in the other direction. And I'm trying to let that pencil like just quickly fade off so it doesn't really have a blunt end to it like a dash mark. And again, I'm looking back at my original, and there's some of this this wood grain that kind of goes along the bottom edge. So I can start right on there, and I'm going to let some float around here as well to kind of complete it so it doesn't look like it's only happening right around the edge. And see, I'm going in both directions. Don't let your lines cross each other, and they don't stop and start all at the same place. And I'll do that side in fast motion. But one thing you want to also do is to help create that good, nice, clean edge after you do some of the wood grain lines. I call it a kind of a cheating shading. So I'm going to just do a little bit of shading right here, just dark enough to allow that little contrast to happen. But the trick is now to let this shading really fade away, so it kind of sneaks up on you. And if nobody knew how to do this, they wouldn't understand how you got that subtle kind of effect. So when you let this fade away, you really have to have a soft, controlled touch. Sometimes you want to let some parts fade away a little bit longer, some a little shorter, and that'll help make it look a little more natural. And remember, these obviously are drawn. They're not going to be photorealistic, but they will have a very natural feel to it, because you'll get a sense of where the light's hitting, you'll get a sense of the right shape, creating a sense of form. You'll make it look grounded by that cast shadow that's attached. I'm just going to do a little bit of shading here, and a little bit of maybe shading out here might make this shading around the cone not look out of place. So I'm going to let this kind of fade in. It's one of those things of repetition. If you do the same thing in a couple different areas, it makes it appear to be very well placed and everything in the right place. So, and now I can make a couple of these lines a little darker, a few of these a little darker out here as well. So again, they don't stand out as being like alone if something is repeated. So I'll do the other side in hypermotion and we'll be just about done. Okay, now that one's done, I don't really have to draw the rest for you on film here, but I can remind you that we are looking back, and you really have to get used to this. Look back at your source very often. It's like every moment you're kind of going back and double checking to make sure the values and the shapes and the line is correct. When you continue on to the next part, this one is much more finished off. Remember in class we talked about, or if you haven't heard about it yet, you will need to do the cylinder with the cylinder done in a warm color, so mostly oranges and reds. If you do it in yellow, that doesn't work as well because you never get a dark feel with yellow. The background will be done in a cool color, so blues and greens and violets. The floor we can use a brown color, and we do the same technique, it's just using a different colored pencil. The sphere, we'll just use regular pencil for that one, and I don't have one finished right now, but that's okay. We can just use regular pencil. It'll have a similar tone as what you see here. The cube, we're going to use any crayon in any color you want. Again, don't use yellow. It's very difficult to see where the values are in yellow. And crayon can be a very good tool to use in a drawing. I've done drawings in crayon before and they look just fine. They just have a slightly different texture to them. And remember, you're going to want to try to replicate this as closely as possible. Yours will be in color except for the sphere. And again, your technique is really important. Remember, we're not doing any smudging with your finger. It's all just pencil technique. And using this technique and really paying attention to those gradations and nice contrasts will just help these forms have a much more natural quality, and you'll have much more control over your technique, and your artwork will just keep on getting better and better. So have fun with this, and we'll see you next time.